Welcome. I'm so glad that you tuned in to this Church Facilities Expo session on the timeline of a construction project. I'm excited to share some information with you that I hope will be helpful if you are in the process considering or thinking about sometime in the future doing some type of a renovation, expansion, or new facility build for some type of project. I want to begin with an illustration and a story. I want to tell you a little bit about Pastor Joe. Pastor Joe needed to relocate from one facility that was in a downtown. He was landlocked and he had an old tired building. It hindered his ministry and he really needed to relocate. So he found a piece of land that was a great deal. He purchased that piece of land, started a capital campaign to raise funding, hired an architect, told the architect what he wanted to build, shared his vision. The architect designed about a 70,000 square foot facility. It came to a time when he was really supposed to begin to move forward, and got the plans from the architect, went to bid it out, and found out he was $3.2 million over his budget. Obviously, he goes back to the banker. They have a conversation. The banker says, listen, we can't loan you that kind of money. And so the capital campaign began to dry up because those who were giving were asking questions about why are we not moving forward. At that point, the banker called me, introduced me, and we had a conversation. I redesigned his building, about 68,000 square feet, about 68,800 square feet, a couple of thousand square feet less than the original. We started construction 4 months later and completed his project $180,000 under his original budget, $3.4 million less. I say all that to say this story is not an untrue story. It's not a fictitious story. This is a true story. Obviously, Pastor Joe's name has been changed to protect the innocent. But the reality is, I see Pastor Joe's all the time, where they don't understand the right steps in the right order. And that's really what we want to talk about today is there is a better way. And that way is to take the right steps in the right order. And there is a timeline to these construction projects that can help you not only wind up on time and on budget, but more importantly, have leadership equity at the end where it's a win for everybody. And so that's kind of what we want to address today. I want to take just a moment to introduce myself. My name's Rodney James, and I am the founder and president of Masters Plan Church Design and Construction, as well as Masters Plan University. And you'll hear some more about that as we move through. But I was raised, my dad built buildings, and so I was raised in construction. I've done everything from place concrete to pull Romex and glue PVC to frame walls and all of in between as a young man growing up with my father who owned a number of businesses. I've been married for 30 years. I have one daughter. And just an amazing opportunity to serve the Lord with my wife and my family through 20 years of ministry, served as an administrator and worship pastor for 7.5 years and senior pastor for another 11.5 years for a total of 20 years in ministry. During that time, I did 3 building projects, and the first 2, I just GC'd myself. I did it the way Dad taught me. We hired the subcontractors. I did a lot of the work. Our church did a lot of the work. And when it came time for the 3rd project, I was like, okay, I need some help. Hired a company to help me with that. And then about 2 years later, had the opportunity to transition out of pastoring our congregation and starting to help pastors and churches all across the nation design and build church ministry facilities. That's been about 9.5 years ago. I've had the opportunity now for the last 9.5 years to pastor pastors and churches through the process of designing and building church ministry facilities. And so it's been an amazing journey, and excited about the opportunity to help you understand what are the right steps in the right order. And so when we talk about a timeline, the typical timeline that for most church projects is this. We get a building committee. We put the team together. We start talking about what we need. Then we hire an architect. We start designing the project. We get the project design based on our vision and our desires and our dreams. And then we go find out how much it costs. And obviously in that time we say, man, we got to start raising money. And so at some point in there's a capital campaign that begins. And ultimately, once we get the bids all back, we find out that our project is over budget. Unfortunately, that's the reality. In fact, 82% of ministry projects that get designed never get constructed. That's a sad statistic, but it is a very much a reality. And so what do we do to change that? What's missing in this process? And that's what we want to talk about today. What are the right steps in the right order? See, this is not necessarily wrong steps. It's just that these aren't the right first steps. And so when we look at this process today, what we want to discover is, what are the right steps in the right order? Well, the reality is we always begin with choosing a team. Who's going to come around your church staff and help you as you navigate this journey of designing and building church facilities, or a renovation or an expansion? And so we select a team. The next step should be to choose a partner to walk with you. Now, not necessarily an architect, not necessarily a builder. You really need a partner to come alongside of you, like a design builder who can help you walk through this whole process from beginning to end. The third step is budget and funding. How much money do we have to spend? You see, the problem is when we go to start design, if we don't know how much we can afford, the problem is we'll always wind up with a project that is greater than what our budgetary requirements will allow us to build. And so when we think about budgeting and funding, we also have to think about our capital campaign. What does that process look like? When do we need to engage them, and how do we go about it? And then the next step, the step that most churches miss, is due diligence and feasibility. Is this project feasible? Can we afford what we really need? Are there things that we're going to have to spend money on before we actually start building the building or doing the remodel? All of those questions need to be answered. Once we've kind of gone through that and said, okay, now we know how much we have to spend before the project, we know what the project budget is, then we really need to talk about, can we borrow the money that's left? Can we raise the money? So you've got your capital campaign team on board. We need to talk to lenders and make sure that we have a clear path forward, that we can afford what we're getting ready to do, and then we can go to the church and cast the vision. You see, we've gone through this whole process before we ever share with the congregation what the project's going to be, what the project's going to cost, how we're going to pay for it, and how we're going to navigate this journey. You can, at that point in the ball game, then we go into the actual design of the building, bidding out your project, and then building the facility. And so what I want to do in the remaining time that we have here this afternoon, is to walk through this process and in step by step help you understand some of the fundamentals of taking these right steps in the right order. So let's just begin right off the bat with selecting your team. So when we think about selecting a team that's going to come around us in the church, I know a lot of times, in fact, I've just written an article on it, selecting the right building team. And when we think about that, the most important thing that I will tell you as you select a team to walk beside you in a building campaign is they must have a heart for the church. That is the most critical, most important decision you can make. I want to say this: building ministry facilities is not a business decision or an economic decision. It is a spiritual decision. And so you need to be sure that your team that you put around you has a heart for the kingdom, to advance the vision and the mission of your church. And so their heart is very, very important. Have a good understanding of the various ministries of your church is really critically important as you walk through this process, making sure that they understand not just maybe one small area, but kind of have a big picture of the various ministries. Also having a good understanding of the various age groups. So I would encourage you to represent all of the various age groups in your ministry when you select a team. And then probably one of the most important things is, do they have time to serve? It's great to have great people selected for your team, but if they can't make the meetings and be a part to keep the process moving forward, that's going to be a hindrance to you. Also, having a servant's heart and not a personal agenda. That's a big deal. It goes back to having a heart for the church, but also having a servant's heart to say, you know what? I'm passionate about youth ministry. I'm passionate about children's ministry. I'm passionate about how we're going to do our new sanctuary and the worship and the media or the technology or whatever area it is, but making sure that that personal agenda is not what drives every decision that they make. And then my last comment on building the right team for your building project is to keep it small. A team of 3 to 5 people can make decisions much more efficiently than a team of 8 to 10 to 12 or even 16. And what happens is you get bogged down and you can't make decisions quickly. It doesn't mean that other people won't be involved in the process. We would want as many people involved in the process at the various stages as we need, but the decision makers need to be kept to a small group of people. So as we select our team, these are things we want to think about in order to put the people around us to help us continue to move forward. The next thing that we want to think about is selecting a partner. Who is this that can walk alongside us? What am I looking for in somebody that can walk alongside us and help us make the right decisions? Well, the first and most important thing you need in a partner to walk with you when you think about designing and building ministry facilities is ministry experience. And I don't mean just somebody who's designed a lot of churches. I mean somebody who's walked in your shoes as a pastor, as an executive pastor, as an administrator, as a children or youth pastor who's been in the process of what takes place in ministry weekend after weekend, week in and week out. And so without ministry experience, it's really hard for folks to understand what's going to happen in your facility when it comes to the weekend experience. So having ministry experience is a critically important aspect of selecting the right partner to walk with you. The other part is you need somebody who can help you with all aspects of your project. It's one thing to hire an architect who can design a building or hire a builder who can build a set of plans. But what about the guidance on financial analysis when you begin? What about helping you with your capital campaign fundraising process? Bringing a partner in who can walk alongside you with that and has those connections. Lending, church lending is very unique, and there are some things that if you know the right questions to ask can make a huge difference in how much money you make in a monthly payment as you move forward. Ministry design is so critical. Understanding the right questions to ask when I think about designing a building, it's not just about how many seats you want or how many children you run or how many rooms do you want your children broken up into. It's talking about the curriculum that you use. It's talking about how do you do ministry. Pastor, how do you teach on the platform? What makes you uncomfortable about the facility you're in? What facilities you've been in that you like to teach or speak in? Those are questions that are ministry related questions that ultimately create the tool, the facility that helps you do the ministry that God's called you to do. The other thing that's really important is vision casting. You need a partner who will help you understand how the right way to unveil this information and cast this vision with your congregation. And of course, we have all of the things like bidding, permitting, construction, and the warranty and the follow-up in the years to come down the road. You want a partner who is not just going to say, I'm going to build this building, when I'm done, I'm gone. You want somebody who really wants to be a partner in helping you see your vision come to reality. Also, somebody who's concerned as much about your ministry as they are about your building project. Listen to the questions that they ask. If they talk to you about how you do ministry, who you're trying to reach, what your vision for the future is, that's the kind of partner who is going to help you design the best facility to facilitate the ministry that you do. Obviously, you want their track record. How many projects have they done? How many have they finished on time and on budget? That's a really important question because you don't want to be going back to your congregation asking for more money than what you originally told them that your project was going to cost. And obviously, I think this should go without saying, but transparency in the process. Transparency and integrity are critically important to you as you walk through this. So when you think about selecting that partner, we want to think about comfortable communication because you and that individual are going to be taking a long journey, and investing a great deal of kingdom resources in this project. So you want somebody that's very comfortable and easy to communicate with as you go through this. So what should I do to select a partner? Well, first of all, verify references. And when you verify those references, it's really important to ask the right questions. So I've given you in your notes some questions to ask, and they are simply things like, how did the builder or the design builder relate to you and your team? How well did they communicate with you throughout the entire process? How interested were they in your ministry and your vision? How did they manage your budgetary parameters as they walked through the design process? Did they keep you within what you could afford? How many or what amount of change orders did you incur throughout and especially at the end of your project? Were you pleased with the overall outcome? Is this building work for you? Did it perform as expected? And then last and foremost, would you interview somebody else if you went to do another project, or would you go back to that same builder? Those are some great questions to ask that are kind of outside the norm of the questions that a lot of folks would ask when they think about selecting a partner. I mentioned earlier that I founded Masters Plan University, and on that website you can find a lot of videos. And one of the videos that would help you in this process is a video on selecting the right partner. And it gives you about a 3 to 5 minute video on the questions to ask, the interview questions when you're interviewing partners, potential partners to go through that process. I encourage you to log on to MPUNIV or go to mastersplanchurchdesignbuild.com and go to Masters Plan University from our website. Because the reality is you need the right partner. Tom Rainer says this in his 6 Keys to Success. The church had a design build firm that was a true partner in ministry. The building company was more than just an architect and a builder. They helped discern and articulate the ministry need behind the new facilities. See, you need a partner, not just an architect, not just a builder. You need somebody who's willing to walk the journey with you from the time that you say, we're thinking about buying land, or we're thinking about buying a building, or we're thinking about building a building, expanding or remodeling, all the way to the point where you get to celebrate your first Sunday in there together. The next thing that we want to talk about is budget and funding. So the first step is determine what you can afford. Makes sense, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, we have to do financial analysis. So we look at all those buckets that we can go to when we think about funding a project. The first one would be our financial analysis. So how much cash do we have on hand that we can dedicate directly to the building? And by the way, if you're not putting aside money for future facilities, I encourage you to begin to do that today, immediately. Begin to make a payment to yourself month after month. It will set you up for success. It will give you the resources you need to get your project kicked off. It will also prove to a lender in the future that you have the ability to make a payment as you move forward. Obviously, the other part is capital fundraising, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. Sale of assets. Maybe you've got some buildings or some lands that you could dispose of in this process to raise capital funds. And then the last is lending. How could we borrow? Who's the right partner to borrow from? And how do we go through that? But we need to do an analysis and say, what can we afford? Your partner should be able to help you do an accurate financial analysis. And so here's a quick one that I'll walk through in our discussion here. So the church had an annual budget of about $1.1 million. They had current church debt of about $600,000. They had cash on hand of a couple $100,000, and then projected cash surplus of $176 as they walked through this process, the payment that they were going to make to themselves, and a potential asset value of $275,000 to $345,000. So this church had another little building on another piece of property that they had the opportunity to sell to raise some capital funding. As they went through this process, the cash surplus, we can see that they were having about an $8,000 cash surplus per month. We were going to take about 22 months going through the due diligence, the feasibility, the design, the permitting, and the construction. So they were able to set aside another $176,000. That's where that number came from in the cash surplus from above. So when we do a financial analysis, we were able to sit here and say on the low side, this church could have potential funding of $4.1 million to about $6.2 million minus their current debt, gives them a project range from $3.6 million to about $5.6 million. Now, that's a big range, but that's kind of like the very low safe end to that end where, God would have to really be involved for this project to move forward at $5.6 million, but it's not beyond what God can do. At least it gives us a range that we can walk through and look at and come to a place of understanding. You need a partner who understands and knows capital funding and lending parameters to help you do an accurate financial analysis so that as you walk through this process, you are walking through it in a way that is accurate, and when you get to the end, you know that you can afford the project. So when we think about those sources of fundings, one of those things that's a really important piece, I believe in our church culture in raising funding is a capital campaign partner. I believe that the whole church needs to be involved and participate in providing the funding, because then they get to participate in the blessings that come on the backside of the project as well, the long-term fruit for their investment in the kingdom. So when you think about choosing a capital campaign partner, again, I'm going to go back to this in every instance that we go into, you need somebody who's ministry focused. You don't need somebody who's got a box plan that says this is the way we do it. You need somebody who comes in to sit down and think about and talk with you about how you do ministry and about how your organization organization is structured, because you know better than anyone the best ways to communicate to your people. Secondly, to have an adaptable plan. So you may be different than Church ABC, and based on that, you need a different type of plan. You need a different approach. And so you need somebody who adapts to the way you do ministry and the way that you are set up for communication. Also, experience and longevity. I mean, I know guys that have been in this business for 20 years doing what they're doing, very successful at it. I recommend that you make sure that somebody that you choose as a capital campaign partner has that type of longevity. Relationships. You need to be comfortable with your consultant. You're going to spend 3 years with this individual back and forth in communications. You need a long-term relationship that can help you. Many times, capital campaigns are done back to back, and so that you can build a project and be debt-free in 7 years. So all of those things are really important, but the most important is that timing is everything. Far too often, the churches will go to an architect, get a design, and then go and find out how much it costs, and then get the capital campaign guy. Don't wait until it's too late. There is a process about 3 to 4 months where all of the due diligence and feasibility for the capital campaign has to be done as well. And so it takes time to prepare before we're ready to cast that vision, before we're ready to raise the funding. And you want to make sure that they walk hand in hand. Your building partner and your capital campaign partner should walk hand in hand. So when we think about the budget and funding, the first step is determine what you can afford, do the financial analysis, but this is the most important thing that I can say to you in this. The budget must drive the process, not vision alone. The reason we put funding and budgeting so high in the order of the steps is we must know how much money you have, and we must make sure that the entire process is designed and works around that budgetary parameter. So it's great to have vision, and I talk about this in this way. Vision is where we're going to go in the promised land, but what is it going to take to get across the Red Sea? What do we need to do today in order to have a victory and celebrate what God's done and come out with leadership equity on the other side? And so the budget must drive the project. When vision drives, here's the typical way that it happens. We have this great vision. We have all these dreams. That determines the scope of what we're going to build. Oh, we want this new children's building and youth facility, and we got to add parking, and we're going to renovate the sanctuary, and we go through all of these things. And so that sets up the scope. And then we have the conversation with our designer, and that's what gets designed. And then we put it out to bid, and guess what? 82% of the time, it's over budget. So what do we do at that point? Well, we either build it and we're over budget, or we redesign it, or we abandon the project altogether. Only 18% of the time do we actually get to build it and come up with the other funding. The other 82% of the time, we pay more money to redesign, or we abandon the project altogether. I watched this cycle happen when I first came into this world, and I said, there's got to be a better way. And that's when we came up with this plan that really, really works, putting the right steps in the right order. You start with a vision and dreams. Those don't change. That may be the promised land someday, but we really need to determine what we can afford today in this process. Once we determine what we can afford, that sets the scope of what we're going to do in this process. How much a renovation can we afford? How big of an expansion can we do? How much land can we afford to buy, and what's the real cost of that land? Or how much of a facility can we replace if we move to a new location? All of those questions can be answered before we start the design and the bidding process. And so as we go through this, what happens is the scope always refers back to the budget. So I always go back to the budget to answer the questions while we're in design. Hey, I would love to put a drive-through on the front of the church. Well, the design goes back to the budget and says, can we afford it? And if the budget says no, we say, you know what, that we can do that, we can design it, but it'll have to be a future phase. What you ensure is that when you get through the design and the bidding process, when you take this path, is that you can afford to build what you've designed. It winds up a win for everyone in the process. So this is the difference between the budget driving the process or the vision driving the process. The vision still gets accomplished. It just may get accomplished further in the future as we walk through the journey. When we know our budget, now we have to say, how much is this really going to cost? So we know what we can afford. I mean, I'm reminded of what Jesus said in Luke chapter 14. He said, for which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it. Otherwise, when he's laid the foundation, is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. None of us want to be the church that couldn't afford to finish. None of us want to be the pastor or the executive pastor who led our congregation up to a point and said, oh, by the way, we can't afford what we originally showed you in the design. You do not want to do that. The second most important thing about this verse that Jesus quoted is not just the cost of the building, but the cost of the entire project. What is everything that we're going to have to do cost? So as we walk through this, we think about how do we determine what that is? I mentioned earlier due diligence and feasibility. So when we go through this process, what we want to do is we want to identify any possible obstacles to the project. That means something that might be a complete stopper to the entire project, whether it's budget that requires the stopper, or there may be other issues. There may be code issues. There may be zoning issues. There may be city permitting issues. There may be a lot of things that would hinder a project from being able to move forward. Wouldn't we like to know that before we spend any money designing? And so that's one of the first things in due diligence and feasibility that we want to discover. The second is identifying all the requirements, or basically everything we have to do before we go design and build the building. So things like on our land, if we're gonna build a new building, or if we're expanding, are our utilities sufficient? Is this going to affect our stormwater management process? Is the Department of Transportation going to make us put in an acceleration or a deceleration lane or a turn lane? Do we have environmental issues on this land that we're going to have to deal with? Maybe wetlands. We want to do geotechnical exploration and see what's underneath the dirt that might cost us money as we start into the construction process. Are there zoning issues? There can be any number of things that we would want to address and identify as requirements. Once we do that, then we want to identify what those costs are. So renovation, if we're just going to remodel the sanctuary, we're going to have to address things like life safety issues, the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, maybe a code analysis for a building that was built in the 1970s or 80s, and now it's got new codes in the city and the national codes that we're going to have to meet before we can do a renovation. If we're repurposing a building, there are things like infrastructure, the structure, the parking, the zoning, the slab of the building, analysis of codes and expansion of the whole entire piece. Is it big enough to do what we want to do? So when we look at all of these things, we identify, okay, before we build, we're going to have to address this bucket of items. Then the next thing is to accurately determine the cost of those things that are in that bucket. If they're going to make us put in a turn lane, what is that going to cost? If our sewer line's not big enough, what is that going to cost? No matter if we build 4,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, the sewer line's got to be upgraded. What does that cost? So once we do that, then we get real construction costs to say, these are not guesstimates. These are not some square footage number that's ethereal. We want to find out how many feet of that sewer line we have to replace and what is it going to cost to replace it. Then we can set aside that money in a bucket over here and say, remember, we determined we had so much to spend. Now we know we've got to spend this before we start design. So let's make sure we take that out of the budget and we design to what is left. Once that's done, then we can develop the concept, the site plan, and then go sit down with the city for one last opportunity to say to the city, is there anything else that you think we might need to do as we think about building this current project? So that's due diligence and feasibility, and it will relieve a lot of heartache, a lot of hurt in the process once you go past this to the design. We want to know what fits in this project before we start the design process. Once you kind of have your due diligence and feasibility, now you've got a concept. You should have some renderings. You should have the floor plans. But more importantly, you should have an itemized budget of what your project is going to cost. When you have that, now we can go sit down and have a conversation with lenders and say, you know what, this is what we're going to build. We believe this is what it's going to cost. You've had a conversation already. If you remember, we've engaged a capital campaign partner. We believe this is how much we're going to raise. And knowing what you can borrow is the important next step. When you think about it, there are a couple of ways to do this. One is you can engage a consultant who can provide multiple lenders for you. They basically do the footwork, they do the negotiating for you. If you don't have somebody on your staff or in your church that has the time and the expertise to do that, you can consider hiring a consultant who can do all of the footwork for you and recommend to you the most appropriate lender for your project. The other way is to interview church lenders. I say this all the time. Churches I interview with, I talk to, that we engage with, that we partner with, say, you know, we've got a local bank and we've done business with them for years. And I say, man, that's great. I still think you ought to have some interviews with some church lenders. You're going to learn some things about church lending in those interviews that you can go back and negotiate with your local bank. And so terms and conditions that local lenders may not offer, you learn. Your partner should assist you with those relationships. Your building partner should be able to help you, connect you with the right type of lenders to have those conversations, and your partner should assist you with questions on terms that you should consider in the lending process. Those are all things that we love to help our clients, our partners with as we walk through this due diligence and feasibility, as we walk through this front end piece. Hey, by the way, when you start talking to lenders, here are 3 or 4 really important questions you want to be sure that you ask. Next, we've come to this place where we've determined our budget, we've determined all of the costs before we do the project, we've designed the concept to the budget that we have left, you've got the budget, you've got your capital campaign, you've got your lender. It's time now to begin to cast the vision. We want to bring in the leadership of the church, we want to bring in the whole entire congregation, and we want to begin to share this vision. Let me say a few things very quickly about casting vision. Number 1, casting vision must be pastor-led. It must be pastor-led. I have watched many different congregations try to lead with a building committee, try to lead with an executive pastor or an administrator, and while all of those have credibility, the vision of the pastor to move the congregation forward always has much more buy-in and success from the capital campaign side, raising funding, to the vision side of buy-in. Focus on ministry and not the building when you're casting vision. Looking for heart engagement. When you look at Moses, when he shared about the vision God gave him for the tabernacle, Moses didn't ask for money. The people gave whose hearts stirred them. Why? Because they saw the vision. They saw the opportunity to worship. They saw how other nations would see their God. And so it's really important that we focus not on the bricks or the number of seats, but we focus on the lives that will be changed. There is a great video on Masters Plan University, by the way, on casting vision. And if you're at a place where you're just about to cast vision, I strongly encourage you to take the 3 to 5 minutes and watch that video. Everything is about timing when you're casting vision. I've learned this over the years. I learned it first as a pastor, and I've learned it as I've helped over 140 pastors through this process. Progressive information release is much more powerful than backing the dump truck up and unloading it all at once. Coordinated with your capital campaign, you can have much more synergy through the process if you share bits and pieces along the way. There's always these months and weeks of designing, through the process of design, through the process of permitting, through the process of bidding, where the congregation doesn't see a lot of movement. So what can we do during that time? Listen, your partner ought to be providing you with resources along the way that you can be showing the congregation as you progress through the design process, so that when you get to the end, the excitement level goes from here to here instead of having done this during those months of preparation. Timing is everything, and unloading those resources along the way in the right order is something that is really important to that process. Coaching from a partner who's been there is so powerful. So again, I want to recommend if you're going to cast vision for a building project, take the time to go see the video on Masters Plan University. So we've kind of come through this first, what I call the steps of the process in the right order. We've chosen our team. We've chosen a partner. We've determined what we can afford through all of our resources. We've engaged a capital campaign partner. He's done his preliminary work. He's given you what the realistic numbers of what you can really afford to raise. We've done the due diligence and feasibility. We figured out everything that's in this bucket over here before we design the building. We've interviewed lenders. We know we can borrow the money. We've cast the vision. And now we're at a place where if we need to pause because we need to raise more funding, or we need to pause because something else is going on, this is a great opportunity to pause. You've invested money up to this point, not spent money, because you should be able to pick up at this point and move forward at any time in the future to take these last final steps that actually motivate you and move you into the full project itself. So what are the next steps in this process? Complete the design. We're going to talk about that. And so as we think about where we go next, the next step is we're going to engage the full design. We're going to look at how every room is going to be built. We're going to talk about all the details of the building. And I want to say this, before you step off of this, you've got this concept, you've seen the renderings, your team needs to have unity on all the concepts before moving forward. It is no fun for anybody, for the design team, for the construction team, or for the church, to get part of the way down the road in the full design process and decide you want to start moving walls or changing doors, or especially changing the structure of the building. That's a very costly process. So have unity on the concepts before you move into the full design steps. Then, normally, we have two segments of design. Design development. This is the decisions and the details that the church will be making, that your team will have to make. Everything down from the type of lock set on the door all the way to the type of flush valves on the toilets. You're going to have to be involved. You're going to have to be set up to have meetings on a regular basis, gathering people, getting information, putting that information together to give back to the design team as you walk through this. You need to have a partner who says, I'm going to be the one who's going to walk you through this. Not 6 or 7 different people that you'll see along the way. You need an individual who will walk you through this because they've understood what you've been through already in this process. Once you get through the design development, which usually takes about 3 months to get through that process, then you're going to go into construction documents. At this point, this is where the detailed documents for how the building fits together, for permitting, for construction, all of that will be done. And that's really behind the scenes. There's not a lot of involvement from the church during that process. That's a place where you get to sit back for a few months and relax. You've kind of come through the flurry of all the decisions about the building, and now we're waiting for the permitting process. Again, this is where the casting vision over the period of time becomes so valuable to your congregation and to your team. Depending on the scope and the complexity of the whole entire process, it should take about 4 to 6 months to get you to the place where you're ready to submit for permitting and move the project into the next phase, which is construction. Let me say this as you go through design. It's really important that your partner helps you and you allow your partner to keep you within your budget. Expect updated budgets throughout that design process. Expect actual construction costs, not square footage estimates. Your partner should be able to provide you with options and of realistic costs to say, if you want to add the drive-through, we can do that, but we're going to have to take this piece out over here in the youth ministry in order to afford that. I can give you the information, but it's your decision. The most important thing that I would say to you is this: do not over-design. When we get excited about adding this and adding that and adding this, and all of a sudden we're over the budget, let me just tell you, nobody wins in that scenario. At some point, we have to be back within what we can afford to raise, what we can afford to borrow, and the cash that we have on hand. So the reality is, don't over-design, and don't let your partner lead you to over-design. Don't let the consultants with AVL or with furnishings or other pieces of the building lead you into an over-designed project. It is no fun. Continually compare the design against ministry function. I would say this over and over. Think about how this building is going to work for you on Sunday morning, on Saturday night, on Wednesday, on Thursday afternoon, on Friday evening, for the events that you do within your facility. Your partner should be able to provide you with the visuals, models, renderings, animations, and literally actual physical representations of the space to help you grasp the size and the volume of the spaces that you're designing. And so it's really important as you walk through that process. This is your building. And so they should help you design the building that works for you in ministry and helps you understand what that building's going to look like when you're finished. We move from the design process into the bidding process. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times when you go and you just design with an architect, then it gets turned over to be bid, you're going to get 3 bids. You're going to find 3 contractors to look at these set of plans and give you a cost of what that building's going to be. It's much better to have 30 bids. You want to see all the bids. What's the concrete going to cost? What's the steel going to cost? What's the electric going to cost? What's the plumbing going to cost? Expect total transparency. Expect a partner that will show you all of the bids. Your partner should work for you in the bidding process. That means if you go out and get 3 bids and they're all high, they're all over budget, you need to go back and find some more bids. You need to go back and find some other subcontractors. We don't just accept the low bid. You need to find somebody who's willing to work for you to keep your project within budget. And your churches often have subcontractors within their congregation, and your partner should help you walk through that process. There are church-friendly subcontractors, and we want them involved. However, sometimes there are those who maybe shouldn't be involved in your community or in your church congregation, and you say, we need a process to help you. Your partner should help you navigate that process and take that responsibility off of you as a ministry staff person. They should accept that responsibility and navigate that for you. The other thing that I would say is this. It's really important when you're looking at the bidding process to have a partner who has national bidding and buying power. As a nationwide church designer, we have subcontractors all over the country that work for us and want to work for us because of our reputation and because of the way they get paid. And so I want to encourage you, you need to consider, when you consider having a partner, to have somebody who has that nationwide ability to bid out your project. Finally, we're finally into construction. You see how far along we are to get to that point, maximizing the construction. And I will say this, when you're building church facilities, ministry focus matters during construction. Somebody who understands where you're going to put the whiteboard, where the TV needs to be located, what the AVL components and that process, how it's important to design the room for the AVL, not the AVL to the room. All of those things matter during the construction process as well as during design. Church-friendly subcontractors. I know this. I've not ever built a building that takes 2 years to build that I haven't had to put pause on an afternoon because the church needed to do a funeral, or the church had to schedule a wedding on a weekend and we needed to be at a place where they could do those events. You need a partner who understands that and understands that in their subcontracts, they allow the church those opportunities. Let me talk about billing for just a moment. I believe billing should be completely transparent. As a church, you should be able to see every pay app, every invoice, and every receipt. And you should not be charged for reimbursable expenses just because they actually went out and bought something for you. Manage the process for you. They should take care of putting all the paperwork together, but let you issue the checks. There's opportunities for money savings when that is the process. And your lender will love that as well. When it comes to insurance, you should have a partner who can help you secure the builder's risk. Most contracts say it's the owner's responsibility, and many owners will go to their insurance agent and they will pay their agent to pay a broker, to pay an underwriter to get a policy. Why not have somebody who has access directly to the underwriters to get that insurance for you, and also minimize your general liability reimbursement cost? Every general contractor has that. We've learned ways to minimize that for churches. It's really important to understand what you're paying for those types of insurance. And then finally, on-site management matters. It makes a difference when you have somebody who is on-site full-time, 100% of the time, managing your project. Not somebody who's managing 3 projects in town and you get a third of their time. It's really important to make sure that you have somebody on your project every single day. When you take these right steps in the right order, all the way through this process, you can be assured with the right partner on your side, you can finish your project on time and on budget, and you can finish it in a way that everybody wins. That's the goal. I invite you to visit our website at mastersplanchurchdesignbuild.com or visit Masters Plan University, which is located, can be found either on our website or at mpuniv.com. And there's many other free resources available to you there, videos, ebooks, articles, all kinds of information that we've put together based on the years of experience that we've had in designing and building church ministry facilities across the nation. I hope that this has been a helpful session for you, and I hope that if you're looking to think about, talk about building, expanding, renovating, that you'll go to our website or you'll pick up the phone and give us a call. I would love to come visit with you about your next project. God bless you, and thank you so much for this opportunity.